Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'm going to talk about how to not be bored. This is a subject that was suggested to me by Absurd Scandal and seconded by Kyle Smith about how to appreciate things without becoming bored by them. And as Absurd Scandal mentioned, there's actually a kind of Chestertonian theme to this. And in particular, the one that really comes to mind is the famous quote, "There is no such thing on this earth as an uninteresting subject. All that can exist is an uninterested person." And I've always liked that quote. Anyway, there are a few aspects to this, because there is how to be interested in something that does not strike you as interesting, and also how to find something interesting even though you have already experienced it. For example, something like rereading a book, rewatching a movie, and so on. So, obviously there is a relationship between these two things, though not precisely the same. So, not all subjects will be interesting to all people, because we are finite creatures and we've only been given to appreciate the good in some things. That's what being interested is. It's appreciating the good in something. So, when it comes to being able to become interested in something, to find it interesting to learn about, sometimes this is simply a matter of how the thing is presented to us. And so, to some degree, looking for different teachers may be the way to go about that. So if you're trying to become interested in some subject, because it would be good to know about for whatever reason, but it's not, that reason is not simply that you are drawn to it immediately, then I would suggest looking for different teachers, different people talking about it until you find somebody who clicks with you, where their perspective on it is one that you can enter into. And so, often, but not always, that's going to be somebody with whom you share similar perspectives on other things. But not always the case, and to some degree you just have to look around. Now, on what's probably the bigger subject, I think, how to not be bored by things that you have already appreciated. So like how to reread books, how to rewatch movies, things like that. There's sort of an interesting thing. So there are two things. Whenever you are encountering something for the first time, there is the actual thing itself that you are looking at. So there's whatever good there is in the thing. And then the second part of it is there is the element of surprise, of novelty, that feeling of learning something new. And I don't mean this in like a learning something new in the sense of like just taking a course. Like you can, hearing a joke is learning something new. Reading a piece of fiction is learning something new. Now, jokes in particular, there's a special element to jokes, and jokes can't always be funny. Because the essence of humor is essentially the encapsulation of two or more truths side by side that are very hard to hold together. And Chesterton actually gave the example of this, of a man sitting on his hat. I'm sure I remember where he said this. But that there are two things in this that are sort of held side by side. On the one hand, there's the fact that there is the hat, and that human beings are, in some sense, like little g gods in the earth, that they can work these raw materials into these amazing shapes and produce something as amazing as a hat. At the same time, we are fallen creatures who can do such amazingly dumb things like forget that we put our hat on a chair and then sit down on it. This is especially the case in the good old days of top hats, when the joke of sitting on a hat seemed especially to appeal to people. And so you have simultaneously the truth of the tremendous accomplishments of human beings, how far above the beasts human beings are, and also how close to the beasts human beings are, and how far away from our great accomplishments we can be. And these two truths being together right next to each other in the act of a man sitting on his hat, this is funny because it startles us about these two truths and how they can be true at the same time. The thing is, you can't go on being startled forever. And so the reaction of something being funny is intrinsically limited. And so humor is really curious, because something which is merely funny, you really can't go on finding, you'll never go on finding it funny. And if there's nothing in it besides the funny thing, if it's just commonplace truths that aren't normally put next to each other, well, then there's kind of nothing there to find. And more to the point, nothing there to remind yourself of. So, the next thing, and this is sort of, they're really in some sense getting 3 stages to this. So the next thing is that, what I just mentioned, reminding yourself of something. So in something that is more than just funny, that contains truths that are easy to forget, this is where it makes sense to keep on going back to things where these are truths that are hard to remember. So, one of the classic examples of this is church. To really keep the great mass and tangle of creation in its proper proportion, to remember how things relate to each other and so on, that's something that is very, very difficult to remember. And therefore, to constantly remind yourself of it simply has value. So, the key there to appreciating that sort of thing, of reminding yourself of things that are hard to remember, is to make a point of entering into the thing, not merely to think of the abstraction of it, but to really fully enter into it. Because we tend to hold on to the abstractions. It's the fullness of the truth that we so easily forget. And so if you only partially pay attention, that's when you'll kind of know it all and there'll be nothing new. It's making yourself enter fully into it, wherein you will find the meat of the thing, the true substance, the not just the abstraction, but the reality of it. And that will be the thing that you will have most lost sight of and be easiest to re-enter, or you'll be able to re-enter into it. And so there will still be some element of novelty each time you come back, simply because you will have forgotten, because the thing is, in our fallen state, too big to hold on to. So that's the second part. When it comes to rereading a book that is very educational, like the way that I reread orthodoxy, I have this tendency in these videos, I don't know why, I always point at the books, because my bookshelves are over there. My main bookshelves, there are other bookshelves in the house, but my main bookshelves are right there. So I have this tendency to point to the book on the bookshelf, as if that does anybody else any good. Anyway, so orthodoxy, I haven't reread orthodoxy too much recently. I reread it about 20 times, and really, especially since my 3rd child was born, all sorts of things that I used to do fell by the wayside a bit, and just so much energy was taken up with my children that I just had less for other things. But in any event, like, rereading orthodoxy is valuable as long as I don't just kind of think of the turns of phrase and the clever paradoxes, but really enter into what Chesterton is saying. There's always things in it which I have forgotten. When Chesterton talks about the sort of how amazing creation is, because you have that feeling, or you can get that feeling, that it is made by a choice because it could have been made differently, and that everything has a specialness to it because it is the way it is and not some other way, but could have been some other way. So, like, something like that, it's easy to forget about. It's easy to take things for granted and to call oneself to mind of those things that one knows but so easily loses. It takes a bit of energy to not let yourself get distracted by things like pretty turns of phrase. The great image of the grass like the hair on a giant, or something like that. The images can be startling, and the images can sort of attract your attention, so you only think of them, you only think of the language and not really of the substance. So a lot of it is just spending the energy to focus yourself on the substance rather than the sort of surface layer of it. And that really helps tremendously with doing things like rereading a book, rewatching a movie, to really spend the energy to focus. It does take energy. And this is the thing, and this actually gets to something in orthodoxy. When Chesterton mentions that, I can't remember. I was going to say, is that chapter 4, but I don't think so. There's this thing where Chesterton talks about how that it takes energy to be happy. that a child kicks his legs through an excess of life. And he had a great line. The regularity, Chesterton mentions, often comes where things are alive. We have this habit of analogizing things that are regular to things that are machines. But that this is actually not the way things work. That things that are, that usually the breakdown of something occasions not repetition, but rather the opposite of repetition, novelty. And so things break down. So I give the example of the child who kicks its legs rhythmically through an excess of life. And that, adults don't kick their legs rhythmically, but that's because they don't have the energy to do it. They want to conserve their energy for something else. My memory's a little bit failing. There's a great line too about, I don't always rise in the morning, but when I don't rise in the morning, that's because not of the excess of life, but you're in excess of energy, but because of its absence. And so then Chesterton talks about that the occurrences that we observe in nature, that the sun rises every day and the moon rises most nights, that these things may be because God has the eternal appetite of infancy and says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every night, do it again to the moon. For we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. And there's a great deal of truth to this. A little less about the theological aspect of it, the property of God. Although God does have, there are aspects that little children have of God that we don't, because we lose these things. And in particular, though, the one about life is very accurate, that we often don't have the energy to be happy. And we don't have the energy to be happy, not because we actually lack the energy, but because we have gotten out of the habit of spending this energy. I mean, it actually reminds me, Ed Lattimore, I've actually had him on a video of mine as a friend, and you can find him on Twitter, and he also occasionally dispenses the same sort of thing on Instagram. He's written various books and so on. Very interesting guy. I recommend looking him up. But one of the things he mentioned is the reason is he tends to like to phrase things a little aphoristically. And one of his aphorisms is the reason you don't have the energy to go to the gym is because you don't go to the gym. And there's a lot there, actually, because like you feel, when you don't use your body, you feel tired all the time. When you do use your body, that's when you tend to have energy. I mean, there's a point of eventual exhaustion. Nobody can go forever. But it is very much the case that if you never use your body, you never feel up to using your body. And in the like manner, if you don't take the trouble to spend the energy to really pay attention to things, you will find yourself never having the energy to pay attention to things. And so really focusing yourself, spending that energy to pay attention to things, though you'll not in all cases have this energy, you often do. And if you're not in the habit of spending this energy, then you'll feel like you don't when you do. And so you need to build up this habit of spending energy in order to really pay attention to things. Okay, and then we come to the third part, because this is that there is still an element of, if you pay attention, there's sort of an element of novelty simply because you've already forgotten. And then we come to what is probably the hardest of all, and also, in a sense, the most important of all, which is the ability to appreciate a good that we already perceive. And so when you have not forgotten the goodness of something, to appreciate it even though it is not new and you have not forgotten it, takes in many ways the most energy. To look at the beauty, to go outside and look at the beauty of a tree, and it's right there, and it's beautiful, and you're struck by its beauty. But then you still remember it. If you moments later you remember it. And to be able to sit there and keep looking at it takes more energy. To be able to see the thing and perceive the thing, and to continue to look at it rather than to turn away, to pay attention to it rather than to turn your thoughts away onto something else, for your mind to wander. And I mean, to some degree, it's minds wander. That's what they do in a fallen world. But this is perhaps the biggest challenge, and it really is in many ways I mean, it's not different. What's not happening, because living in a fallen world, our attention is attracted by change. And for good reason, because, not to go over evolutionary psychology on it, but, motion tends to attract our attention because, well, a predator has to move in order to get at us. And so if something is moving, it's a good idea to be aware of what the heck it is. Just generally a good strategy. And so, also true of if you're hunting as well. Like, unless you somehow magically start with your prey right in front of you with your weapon, you're going to have to go somewhere and then wait for the prey to come, or you're going to have to go somewhere and find the thing you're hunting. Either way, you're going to be experiencing change, and the thing you're looking for you will find only when you perceive what has changed. As I said, unless you were to somehow magically just start off with the thing you're hunting right in front of you with your weapon. And it's very unlikely you're going to find, a deer in your, archery room. So the point being, we are naturally attracted by change. We're naturally attracted to anything which is changing. We're naturally attracted to motion, which is actually another word for change, or local motion, change in locus or location. And so we have a great support from our instinct anytime anything is new to pay attention to that. And when you are perceiving a good, which you have already perceived and fully know, you no longer have the support of those instincts to pay attention to it because it's new. But it's no less good than it was beforehand. You just don't have as ready an energy to pay attention to it. And this is where habit becomes so especially important, where lacking the support of your instincts, of any instincts whatever, you have to have the support. The support has to be made entirely by habit. And so you need to develop, and habit is a lot like muscles. You grow bigger muscles by picking stuff up. Well, you develop stronger habits by doing them, by repetition, by the exercise of the habit. And so here, the key, although, to some degree it's kind of overly simple and a little bit trite, but the key to being able to be happy in reposing in the goodness of something that you perceive is the habit of forcing yourself to pay attention to it. When your mind wants to wander, to bring your mind back to it. And then when your mind wanders again, you bring your mind back to it. And if you've ever looked into anything discussing meditation, you'll notice this is the same thing, the same advice that you will get. Like, anytime you're trying to focus on something, your mind will wander, and the solution is, well, just bring it back. And keep bringing it back. And there's no special thing. You just have to repeatedly make the choice to keep bringing your mind back to the thing you want to concentrate on, the thing you wish to focus upon, because your mind is going to wander. And to be fair to your mind wandering, there is nothing in this life you are supposed to contemplate unceasingly without change, because, well, if nothing else, you need to go to sleep, and you kind of have to pay enough attention to eat in the morning, in the evening, in the afternoon. There are probably a bunch of other things you need to pay attention to as well. And so you really shouldn't be paying attention to just one thing continuously without stop, day and night, unceasingly. That's for after we're dead. So within this world, your attention is only ever supposed to be on a thing temporarily. And so the good news to the fact that our mind tends to wander is that you don't have to be able to keep your mind on a thing unceasingly without change forever, because that's not what we're supposed to be right now. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. And since that would be wrong, much of our nature fights against doing that sort of thing, because it's not, in fact, what we're supposed to be doing. So, that said, as we come each day, we will remember more and more. We'll have less and less of the feeling of novelty when we come back to a thing which is good. So, like, let's say you bought a statue, beautiful statue of something. When you come to contemplate it each day, you will remember it better and better. There'll be less and less novelty. There'll be less and less support to contemplate it. There'll be more and more of a drive you have to go and buy something new, to be always buying new things, to stimulate yourself with newness. Let's take an example. Lots of other ways to be addicted to novelty. And so you don't need to be able to stand there and contemplate for a million years, one thing. And so all you need to be able to do is contemplate it for a while to get the goodness in it. And it is important to remember that even with something that stays relatively the same and something that you remember well, there will be new aspects that the contemplation of it will eventually unfold to you, and relationships to things within the world that there will be to find in the thing, as well as to repose in the goodness of it. So, the basic key to avoiding boredom is in many ways remarkably similar to the basic key to getting strong. Or to getting fit, if you want to be a distance athlete or something like that. Like if you want to run marathons. Well, how do you run marathons? Well, you do a lot of shorter runs. And that's oversimplifying, but to some degree, it's a pretty accurate oversimplification. Just look up any marathon training program. How do you do it? Lots of shorter runs. You don't just do marathons. You do lots of small, shorter runs, and you get better. And so it is with not being bored, it is the forcing of yourself to pay attention to not the abstraction of the thing, but the actual fullness of the thing, to look past the surface to the fullness of it, to, not just remember the line. Like in movies, it's really tempting when you watch a movie. Where you know it well, where you're watching a movie you've seen a bunch of times before, and you know it well, it is very tempting to say the lines with the actors. And this really does get in the way of enjoying the movie, though. I mean, it can be fun to do on its own, often with friends, but especially if you're watching it on your own, the anticipation of what comes next keeps you from being in that moment, paying attention to the moment. The saying of the line yourself tends to keep you from the subtleties that the actor is imbuing into the line. And so these are examples of where you're kind of going on the surface and you're not paying attention because you are focusing your attention on things other than what's in front of you. And so basically, that is how you avoid being bored, is you bored with things that you that you have, is to, or have access to, I should say, is by forcing yourself to keep your attention on the thing itself and the fullness of the thing, rather than merely some aspect of the thing. And to realize that the support of your instincts isn't going to be there, and so you need to exercise, or you need to put in more energy into forcing yourself to actually pay attention to it. And that's the theory of it. And then the practice of it, well, remember, back when I was in grad school, there was a math professor. He was a cyclist. He had this wonderful email signature. It's a quote from some famous cyclist from years before. And evidently he had been asked a question, because it was the answer of a response. And it was, it doesn't get any easier. You just go faster. And it strikes me that describes so very many things in this world. That it doesn't get easier, you just get better at it. Cycling, it's not like you push less and less hard. You just, for the same amount of pushing your muscles really hard, get more speed out of it, because your muscles are pushing harder. And that's true of so very many things. You get better at it. You're able to produce more effort. And so, while in some theoretical sense, you could, I suppose, be content with a constant level of output, you won't be content with a constant level of output. You won't be content with still going slowly and just not pushing quite as hard. You will keep pushing really hard. You'll get even stronger and go even faster. And if you ever stop pushing really hard, your muscles will atrophy and you'll stop going so fast. And so you'll still have to go right back to pushing just as hard. And so it's a lot easier if you just leave out the slacking off and just keep on pushing really hard, and you go faster and faster. And that's true of, social skills. Being polite to people. Over time, you get more polite. You learn how to interact with people better. You learn how to manage relationships better, where people aren't surprised, where people don't misunderstand you, where, you're able to set expectations. It's a trite phrase, but nonetheless incredibly important in practice, where people take from what you said what you actually meant, and then everyone's happy. And so it goes in everything, and so it goes too with not being bored. That over time, you just get better at paying attention to the things that are in front of you. As you do more of it, you get better at it. And so you still have to put effort into paying attention. It's still the case that if you get too tired, then you can't think of anything, can't pay attention to anything because you can't put the effort in. But other than like at those limits of exhaustion, and sometimes often physical exhaustion, by the way, the only time it has been so many years since I have been bored, I can't tell you. I have this vague, distant memory of having been bored, I don't know, 8 years ago or something like that. And it was a day when I was just so incredibly exhausted, I couldn't think. And I was physically tired. I was literally physically tired. Now, I want to say this is around the birth, somewhere around the birth of my first child. And he really had a lot of trouble sleeping, and we had trouble dealing with it. And, new parents just don't deal as well with their first child as they do with subsequent children, because, hey, they're learning. And so, there's a while I was just so exhausted. I was so exhausted. I was frequently forgetting words, and I was just so tired. And at some point I'd gotten so tired, and I had some actual free time in which there wasn't anything I needed to be doing. And I was so tired I couldn't pay attention to anything. I couldn't even pay attention to just watching a TV show. And so, I have a vague memory of that at that point. And that will happen. You can get so incredibly tired that you don't have the reserves for it. It's a fallen world. That sort of thing happens. But there are advantages, of course, to age. And, I'm in my early 40s. And so I've had a lot of time to practice paying attention to things. And, I'm just reasonably good at it. And so it's funny. If I hear people talk about being bored, I have to recall to myself at this point what that even means. And so, in a practical sense, what is that thing to which this symbol bored refers to? And then I remember, it's not, that hard, but it has been, there's so many things that I find interesting to think about, and I've been putting effort into it for so long that has paid off. And so I mentioned this, not in order to try to impress anyone with me, because, how impressive would that even be anyway? The point being, I can say that this does in fact succeed, that over time, over the course of years, this practice pays off, and you do become interested. And, there are things, still, that, there are things that I can only reread Pride and Prejudice about, once a year, for example. Because I do have trouble paying attention if I do it much more than that. I've read Pride and Prejudice. Orthodoxy and Pride and Prejudice are the two books that I have reread far and away most. I've read both of them at least 20 times. And they're both, at this point, I do have to put a little bit of space in between it. Although at this point, I also just have to ration out my time. Because I've a lot of things to do in relatively little time, so I have to ration out my time as well. But I'm still working on it, and I would be hard pressed to reread Pride and Prejudice continuously. To the moment I got to the end, just going back to the beginning and working my way through again and so on. So I'm still working on it. This life is only over when you're dead, and until then, you're always a work in progress. So. But yeah, I can at least say that it works. I can say from experience that this does in fact work. It's a lot of work. It's effort. But everything good in life takes effort. So it's kind of a good sign that indicates that that's actually the way to do it. Not that everything which is hard is in fact correct. But if it's easy, that's a good indication it's probably wrong. Though not 100% of the time. There are times when our instincts just support us so tremendously well that doing the right thing is in fact easy. So, they're heuristics. They don't have quite universals in that sort of simplistic level of generalization. So, how to not be bored. Hope this was helpful, and until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.